The girl was 8 years old, and she was the only one who saw it. Tobias Wren had not planned to stop that afternoon. He had not planned anything, really. Not since the board meeting, 3 weeks earlier, when everything he had spent 31 years building was placed in a briefcase and handed to men who smiled too easily. He was 63 years old, a senior partner at Hargrove and Ashton, one of the most respected corporate law firms in Calgary, and he had driven home that Tuesday afternoon the long way around, through Elbow Park, past the river, down streets he had not walked since his daughter was small, because he could not yet bring himself to open the front door of a house that would be too quiet. He pulled over near a small playground at the edge of the neighborhood. He had no reason to. He simply stopped. There was a girl sitting on the top rung of the climbing frame, not playing, just watching the street below, with the kind of patience that belongs only to children and very old men. She had dark braids and a yellow raincoat that was too big for her. She was eating an apple slowly, deliberately, the way people eat when they are not thinking about eating at all. Tobias sat with the engine off for a moment. Then he got out, because the car felt smaller than it had 10 minutes ago, and he walked to the bench at the edge of the playground and sat down. The girl did not look at him. She was looking at the row of houses across the street. He said nothing. She said nothing. That suited him fine. After a while, she climbed down from the frame and walked to the bench and sat at the opposite end without asking permission. She ate the last of the apple and set the core neatly on the armrest between them. "Your car has a dent on the back left," she said. "I know," he said. "Did someone hit it a long time ago?" She nodded as though that was a reasonable thing. Then she said, without looking at him, "The man in the gray house across the street has been watching your car since you parked." Tobias looked up. The house was a 2-story colonial revival, slate gray siding, black shutters, a front porch with a wicker chair. There was no one visible. "I don't see anyone," he said. "He stepped back when you looked," she said. She said it without drama, the way she might say the sky is cloudy. "He was standing at the left window upstairs. He's been there a long time. He watched 2 other cars, too. But those ones drove away." Tobias looked at the window. The curtain was still. He was about to say something sensible, that it was probably someone waiting for a delivery, or just looking out at the weather, but then the curtain shifted, just slightly, at the left edge, and the shift was careful. The kind of careful that is not idle. "What's your name?" he said. "Lily," she said. "What's yours, Tobias?" She considered this. "You look like you're waiting for something." "I suppose I am. What are you waiting for?" He did not answer immediately. Across the street, the curtain was still again. A magpie landed on the fence post in front of the gray house and then took off immediately as though it had changed its mind. "I'm not entirely sure," he said honestly. Lily nodded. She had that particular quality of some children, the ones who have spent a lot of time around adults who don't explain themselves. She did not push. She simply accepted the answer and moved on. "My mum's inside," she said, pointing to the house 2 doors down from the gray one. "She's on a call. I'm not supposed to go further than the playground." "That's a sensible rule," he said. "I know." She pulled her raincoat tighter. "The man came out once. About 20 minutes before you stopped. He walked to the corner and looked both ways and then came back inside. He didn't have a dog. People who go for walks have dogs, or they have their phone out. He didn't have anything." Tobias was quiet for a moment. He was a lawyer. He had spent 3 decades reading people, reading rooms, finding the detail that did not belong. He had not been looking at anything carefully for weeks. He had been looking inward, which was less useful. "You notice things," he said. "My grandpa says I have eyes in the back of my head," she said. "But I don't. I checked." Despite everything, he almost smiled. He looked at the gray house again. He did not know who lived there. He did not know this street particularly well, though he had driven past it dozens of times. He knew the neighborhood was quiet, established, the kind of place where people left packages on porches without worrying. He knew it was not a street where you would expect. He stopped the thought. He was getting ahead of himself. A man standing at a window was not a story. A man stepping back when looked at was not a crime. These were the thoughts of a man who had too much time and too little purpose, reading significance into nothing. Lily said, "There are 2 of them." He turned to look at her. "I saw the other one earlier, taller. He came from behind the house, from the lane, and he went in through the back." She pointed to the narrow lane that ran between the gray house and the next. "He had a bag, like a duffel bag, black." Tobias sat very still. "When was this?" he said. "Before you came. Maybe half an hour." She finished thinking about it and added, "He moved fast, like he didn't want anyone to see him." Tobias looked at the lane entrance. It was partly obscured by a cedar hedge, the kind of hedge that was maintained just enough to mark a boundary but had been allowed to grow tall enough to block the sightline from the street. He had not noticed it when he parked. He noticed it now, he said carefully. "Lily, "Is this your usual playground? Do you come here every day?" "Most days," she said. "My mom works from home on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I come here after school. And the gray house, have you ever seen it busy before? Cars in the driveway? People coming and going?" She thought about it seriously. "Mr. Anstruther lives there," she said. "He's old. He has a cane. He goes to church on Sundays in a blue car. His daughter comes sometimes on weekends. But the last few times it wasn't his daughter's car in the driveway. It was a different one, dark green. It doesn't have a sticker on the bumper. His daughter's car has a sticker that says Cape Breton on it." Tobias stared at the gray house for a long moment. He was a corporate lawyer. He dealt in contracts and regulatory filings and due diligence. He did not deal in whatever this was, or might be, or wasn't. He had been sitting on a bench because he had nowhere to be, and a child had told him something that was probably nothing, and he was constructing a scenario out of it because his mind needed something to do. And yet, 31 years of reading people in rooms, and he knew what careful movement looked like. He knew what a man who did not want to be seen looked like. He had seen enough of that in contested litigation, in discovery hearings, in the faces of men who believed they were the smartest person present. He took out his phone and called 311. He was not ready for 911. He was not ready to say, "I think something is wrong at a house on Parkview Crescent," when he had nothing but the observations of an 8-year-old and an old lawyer's instinct. The 311 operator was polite and unhelpful. They could take a note. For concerns about potential criminal activity, they recommended calling 911 or the non-emergency police line. He called the non-emergency line. He gave the address. He said he had noticed what appeared to be unfamiliar individuals entering a property in an unusual manner, and that the property was home to an elderly resident. He said he had no confirmation of anything. He gave his name. He gave his phone number. The officer on the line took it down and said someone would follow up. Lily had been watching him make the calls with frank curiosity. "Did you call the police?" she said. "I called a police number," he said. But you called anyway." "I did." She seemed to think this was correct. She got up, collected her apple core, and walked to the bin at the edge of the playground. Then she came back and stood in front of him with her hands in her pockets. "I think you should know that there's a car parked on the other side of the lane," she said. "I saw it when I went to get my jacket earlier. It's the dark green one. But it's not in the driveway. It's parked in the lane, kind of hidden." Tobias stood up, looked at her for a moment, this child with her yellow raincoat and her careful eyes and her matter-of-fact accounting of things that did not fit. "Lily," he said, "go inside to your mum. Right now. Don't stop to talk to anyone. Tell her that you told me what you saw and that I've called the police." She looked at him levelly. "Are you going to be okay?" "I'm going to stay here and wait," he said. "That's all. You should go in." She looked at the gray house once more, then back at him. Then she turned and walked quickly down the path toward her house, her yellow raincoat bright against the gray afternoon. Tobias stood at the edge of the playground, his phone in his hand. He did not know what was happening in that house. He did not know if Cecil Anstruther, he had heard the name, filed it away, was inside or out, safe or not. He did not know if the two men were connected or coincidental, if the car in the lane meant anything, if the careful curtain meant anything. He was a man with a law degree and a dented car and 31 years of reading rooms, and right now he was reading a house across the street and feeling something that he had not felt in a very long time. He felt youth. "You saw—" He called 911, he said. There was a possible break-in in progress or a setup for one. He gave the address. He described what Lily had seen. The man through the curtain, the second man with the duffel bag entering through the back, the unfamiliar car parked in the lane. He described what he himself had observed. He was careful and specific, the way he had been in 1,000 depositions. He did not editorialize. He gave facts and he gave his name and he waited. The dispatcher kept him on the line. He stood in the cold and waited. And while he waited, he thought about Cecil Anstruther, who used a cane and drove to church on Sundays in a blue car, and whose daughter put a Cape Breton sticker on her bumper, and who apparently had, in recent weeks, begun to receive visitors who parked in the back lane and moved quickly and did not want to be seen. The first patrol car arrived in 6 minutes. It came quietly, no lights, and parked at the far end of the block. 2 officers got out and approached on foot. A second car came from the other direction 2 minutes later and posted at the lane entrance. Tobias watched from the playground bench where he had sat back down because the dispatcher had told him to stay clear and stay on the line. What happened next took a long time and a short time simultaneously, the way these things do. There was knocking at the front door. There were voices, not raised enough to carry to the street. There was movement visible at the side of the house. And then, with a directness that made his chest tighten, there were 2 men being walked to a patrol car. Not struggling, not running, just walking with the particular stillness of men who knew the moment was over. He was released from the call. He sat for another minute, not quite able to move. One of the officers crossed the street toward him. "Mr. Wren?" she said. "Yes, I'm Constable Beaumont." She was young, maybe early 30s, with a composure that reminded him of the junior associates he had trusted most. "You're the caller?" "I am. Most of what I reported came from a child. 8 years old, lives 2 doors down. She's the one who noticed the activity first. She was sitting on that climbing frame." He pointed. "You want to speak with her? I'd suggest going through her mother first." Constable Beaumont wrote something in her notebook. What she observed was accurate, she said. Cecil Anstruther was inside. He's physically unharmed. The 2 individuals appear to have been waiting for him. She paused. It could have been much worse. Tobias let that land. He's 81, she added. Lives alone since his wife passed 2 years ago. He'd been in touch with his bank recently about some suspicious calls. Someone was watching the property to assess his routine. Tobias understood. He had seen versions of this in estates litigation. Not often, but enough. The targeting of older people who lived alone, who kept to routines, who had assets and not enough watchfulness around them. He had seen it in documents, in affidavits at a remove. He had never sat across the street from it. "Will he be all right?" he said. "That's hard for me to say. We're getting him support. His daughter's been called." She looked at him with a directness that was not unfriendly. "You did the right thing, calling when you weren't sure. A lot of people don't. They talk themselves out of it." He did not say, "I had nothing else to do today." He did not say, "I stopped because I needed to stop." He said, "There's a girl who deserves the credit more than I do." Constable Beaumont nodded. She handed him a card and said someone would be in touch if they needed a statement, and then she walked back across the street. Tobias sat for another moment. The light was dropping now, the afternoon gone gray in that flat western way that felt like a lid settling over the city. The playground was empty. The gray house had 2 officers at the door. The lane was blocked by a patrol car with its light bar off. He got up and walked to Lily's house and rang the bell. Her mother answered. She was somewhere in her late 30s, dark-haired, with headphones still around her neck, and the slightly untethered look of someone who had just ended a work call and been told the world had shifted in her absence. Her name, she said, was Renata. She had already spoken to an officer. "She's inside," she said. She looked at him with an uncertainty that was entirely reasonable. He was a stranger who had apparently stood on a bench near her daughter while something alarming happened across the street, and he tried to give her his lawyer face, which he had been told was reassuring in the way that stone walls are reassuring. "I just wanted to make sure she was okay," he said. "She was very calm. She's remarkable." Renata exhaled. "She's always been like that," she said. "Takes everything in. I used to worry about it." "Don't," he said. "It's a gift." A moment later, Lily appeared in the hallway behind her mother, still in the yellow raincoat. She looked past her mother at Tobias with those careful eyes. "Did it work out?" she said. "It did," he said. She nodded once with the gravity of someone completing a task. Then she said, "Mr. Anstruther is nice. He gave me a butterscotch candy once when I said hello to him at the mailbox." "He's okay," Tobias said. "He's going to be okay." Lily looked at him for one more moment, then turned and walked back down the hallway and disappeared into the house. Renata looked at Tobias. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head. "She's the one who saw it," he said. "I just had a phone." He walked back to his car. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, not driving anywhere. He thought about Cecil Anstruther sitting alone in a quiet house, while 2 men who had studied his movements waited to do whatever they had planned to do. He thought about how close that was. He thought about the particular mercy of a child with nothing to do on a Tuesday afternoon except sit on a climbing frame in a yellow raincoat and watch a street with the patience that belongs only to children and very old men. He had stopped because he needed to stop, because the house was too quiet and the day had come apart, and he had 31 years of usefulness behind him and nothing yet in front. He had not stopped because he expected to be needed, but he had been. He started the engine. He drove home the long way, through Elbow Park again, past the river, where the light was doing something extraordinary over the water, gray and gold and briefly bright. He did not feel fixed. He did not feel as though the board meeting had unhappened or the briefcase had come back, but he felt for the first time in 3 weeks as though the quiet in his house might be a thing he could walk into rather than a thing that would swallow him whole. He thought about what Constable Beaumont had said. A lot of people don't. They talk themselves out of it. He had almost talked himself out of it. He had sat on that bench, constructing sensible explanations, delivery men, visiting relatives, a neighbor with a habit of looking out windows, because it was easier to be sensible than to be uncertain, and it was easier to be uncertain than to be wrong in public. He was a man who had built a career on precision, on not making claims he could not support, on the distance between what you observe and what you can prove. He had almost let that distance paralyze him. A child had not let it paralyze her. She had simply said, "Here is what I see," and then she had sat quietly and waited to find out whether it mattered. He pulled into his driveway. He sat for a while longer. He thought about calling his daughter in Montreal, who rang him every Sunday and who had lately taken to ringing on Wednesdays too, as though she could hear through the phone what he was not saying. He thought about whether there were files on his desk that still needed him. There were always files. Even in transition, even in the strange territory between what he had been and what he would become. He thought about tomorrow morning and whether it would feel different, and decided that it might, and that different was not the same as worse. He went inside. The house was quiet. It was still quiet, in the way that a house is always what it is, regardless of who needs it to be otherwise. But he stood in the front hallway, and he did not feel swallowed. He hung up his coat. He put the kettle on. He stood at the kitchen window while the water heated and looked out at the back garden where the cedar tree his wife had planted 20 years ago was just beginning to come into spring, the new growth pale and insistent at every tip. You could miss a great deal, he thought, when you were looking inward. The kettle boiled. He poured the tea. He sat down at the kitchen table and opened his laptop and began, for the first time in 3 weeks, to write something. Not a contract, not a filing, but a letter to the board. Not angry, not pleading, precise. The kind of letter that says, "I am not finished. I am only between things, and I have not lost the capacity to see what is in front of me." Outside, the last of the afternoon light faded over the city. In a house 2 streets over, a man named Cecil Anstruther was on the phone with his daughter, who was already in her car and driving. In a house near the playground, a girl in a yellow raincoat was at the dinner table, eating soup, telling her mother about the man on the bench with the dented car, explaining in the patient way she had that she had just done what anyone would do if they were paying attention. Her mother said, "Not everyone pays attention, Lily." And Lily said, "I know, that's why I do."